All right, let's get to the next pick. That would be LSU defensive tackle Maason Smith. Because of the injury history and because he had a lot of turnover as far as coaches in college, I think that's what scares people a lot. But when playing well, he can be a huge disruptor there in the middle of the defense. And everyone just obviously looks at LSU's defense overall last season and says, well, they were terrible against the run and they were a bad defense. And so therefore anyone that played on their defense isn't good. Maason Smith has some great traits. And I know people hate that word because they want productivity only. But sometimes you do draft a guy with traits and you realize that you can get a lot of potential out of him or make him reach his potential. Obviously, Ed Orgeron recruited Maason Smith, and then now you've got Ryan Nielsen, who's Ed Orgeron's protege here as a defensive coordinator, so he knows everything there is to know about Maason Smith.
Yeah, and I've heard from more than one person that, yes, the Matt House connection, and we're hopefully going to have Matt Moscana out of Baton Rouge, ESPN, on tomorrow, and he broke it down for us when he came on a week and a half ago. But I've seen a lot of LSU fans on the timeline who have been quick to say, like, you know, the gif of when Maason Smith and Jordan Jefferson see Matt House walking into practice and they're giving him the side eye, as he will be the linebackers coach, not the defense coordinator here in Jacksonville. Like, look, I've talked to several people, and they believe this to be true. That LSU defense wasn't bad last season because of the personnel. They had too much talent on the field to be as bad as they were. And so that says to me that has more to do with, were they put in the right position? Was there communication between the different defensive position groups? That says more about coaching to me, because you can't have this just assembly of 5 stars and quality 4 stars and transfers like Jordan Jefferson from West Virginia and not have success with. And so that's why, you know, I just look at it. I look at the Maason Smith pick, and from what I've been told, Ryan Nielsen said, former 5-star, former top 5 overall recruit, Ed's guy. Yeah, I could coach him. I could figure this out. And there's nothing wrong with that. People do it in the draft all the time. And also, as more than one person has noted on the text line and on my personal text line as well, because you guys are really enjoying this conversation. I need to get it sponsored. Maason Smith, if he goes back to school, he probably comes back a top 10 pick. And I am not going to call out one of my former co-hosts, but I will. Maason Smith, the day before the Florida State LSU game in New Orleans, so 2 years ago, the 2022 opener, a certain former co-host of mine said, Maason Smith is going to be a top 10 draft pick one day, and he's going to make a team really good. But now the pick is viewed as a flawed pick because he tore his ACL the next day after that. Last season, as he admitted to us on Friday night, he didn't feel fully healthy and back to himself until November. And because the Jaguars, as I've seen several of you send the numbers about, they reached and he should have been a late second, early third, not picked at number 48. He was there. I was told by multiple people other teams were trying to trade back in because they thought he would fall to the end of the second round and they would try to get him, and the Jaguars seized the opportunity. I do believe if they had been able to trade up for Kool-Aid McKinstry, that changes things. They weren't. New Orleans got their guy. I'm sure we will get into the Jaguars potentially looking into New Orleans guy at cornerback at some point in today's program.
Yeah, this is one of the ones I do not love. I think that for me, I like his frame, his size, his movement. All of that are things that you talk about when you like him. But to me, in the second round, it was a reach, especially when you have guys like Marshawn Nealand and Michael Hall and Ennis Rakestraw still sitting on the boards when you make this pick. And that, for me, so many of the picks were not more so that I hate the pick. Like I said in the beginning, Trent Baalke just drafts so weird, and I can never fully understand the way his mind works when he's drafting, because to me there was just so much talent still available that was sitting on the board. So that's why it feels like reaches and at positional needs too. So it was just strange for me. I also do think, and yes, we know like the ACL is kind of what like started to knock ACL guy for Trent Baalke, go figure. But it also was for me, because of the LSU situation, and I do think there was talent on that line. There was a guy, Mekhi Wingo, who ended up going way later, and I was surprised about because to me, he was the best person on that defense. To me, Maason Smith was probably more like the third best guy on that defense, and they were all still available, and he went first. But it's interesting. I mean, obviously, they see something that they really like out of him and that they love. I'm hoping I'm wrong in this scenario. I know when I was doing, for example, my podcast on the LSU players, the guy that I was talking to kind of was just saying how much of a disaster the LSU defense was. And yes, a lot of it kind of came down more to coaching and them not being able to figure things out. but they were just saying there were so many issues. Like mid-season, they brought a guy, Peter Jenkins, in to try and help this defense because these guys couldn't tackle. They couldn't figure out their form. They couldn't do all of these things, and Maason Smith was one of the ones that he said that they were working a lot with trying to get up to this next level. So you used a second-round pick on a guy, to me, already kind of needs some work coming, with an ACL injury too, but also is kind of a little bit of a project coming off a team too where he's had some really bad coaching. And to me, I felt like we saw regression because of that. So I'm hoping that being in this spot, being in Jacksonville with kind of what is going on defensively for them with Ryan Nielsen and some obviously being with familiar faces too helps him. I'm just seeing like it's going to take a little bit for us to see product out of him.
One quick note, Lauren. First off, Maason Smith had 3 defensive line coaches in 3 years. He pointed that out to us. This is the first time in his life that he actually will have a coach from the season prior heading into the next season with Matt House, even though he's the linebackers coach, but I digress. Several of you on the text line and the YouTube chat line have suggested that Maason Smith is just K'Lavon Chaisson.
Oh, goodness.
Allow for me to illuminate for you.
2 completely different positions, first of all.
So let's start with that. K'Lavon Chaisson, when he was drafted by the Jaguars in 2020, 6'3", 254 pounds, 32 1/4 inch arms. All right? You got those numbers in your head?
Yep.
Maason Smith is 6'5", 306 pounds. He told us he's trying to get to 315, 35 inch arms. Plays inside. Will play 3 tech, 5 tech.
He's defensive tackle.
He certainly can line up, and I've seen some tape from his freshman season at LSU circulating. You certainly could line him up out wide, and he could rush the passer from there. But K'Lavon Chaisson, at the end of the day, was a tweener project that after Yannick Ngakoue had requested a trade and the franchise tag had him at the time of the April 2020 draft. Quite literally, it was, all right, how are we going to replace Jan? I know. Let's take this project at 20, who is a tweener but appears to be young and his best football could be ahead of him. Maybe he's a little questionable against the run, but he's undersized, but it could give us a different sort of fastball against Josh Allen. Quite literally, that was why he was drafted. Maason Smith is not a fastball. He is a bull in a china shop. Mm-hmm. And the sooner you recognize that, the more you will understand why this pick was selected, because so many of you are the same fans and the same viewers and the same listeners who clamored about the Jaguars not having, a pass rush from the interior. Once Devon Hamilton went down with an injury and illness that he can never be faulted for that, first and foremost, it was, well, why can't we get any push from the interior? There were several moves made in the NFL draft and several moves that Trent Baalke made in free agency this offseason to answer that question that so many of you had throughout the course of the 2023 season. And now you're mad.
Because that's to my point to start the show. They're always going to be mad as long as he's the one making the selections. But if you dig deeper into each player, and that's what I know we have done for the past few days, is when healthy, like I said, he can be so good as far as QB pressures. He had the second most in the entire SEC, which, oh, by the way, is a pretty good brand of football. He had 20 quarterback pressures with lining up as a defensive tackle last season, which was the second most in all of the SEC. So you have to look for sometimes the positive if all you see is the fact that the LSU defense was terrible. You have to dig a little deeper than that. The K'Lavon Chaisson comparison to me is just laughable. Like, if you really think that those two are on the same path, then I feel like you just don't watch football, because, again, Maason Smith, oh, by the way, is now going to be probably not a starter on this football team because you went and got Eric Armstead.
Which
and
is why people don't like that it was the second-round pick.
And I understand that, but in football, especially someone's going to get injured at some point in time, and so you have to have a guy that's ready that you believe will be your starter for years to come. What if Eric Armstead comes here? He wasn't particularly super 100% healthy when he got here. What if he has some sort of injury? Now you just go, oh, well, there went our pass rush up the middle.
Or what if this?
We're done.
What if he is good this year at age 30, but, he's going to be 31 the next year he's under contract. He's going to be 32 the next year he's under contract. Now you have a guy who not only could play next to him this year, but could be waiting in the wings behind him as well in the years to come.
Yeah. And I just think people don't like it at 2. That's kind of where I sit with it, because it's just when you want, especially in a draft where everything fell off so massively at like round 4, you wanted guys that you were going to see on the football field, especially after last year when pretty much Anton's the only one that really made any sort of impact whatsoever coming out of that draft. So they were, I think, hoping, especially looking at you're coming in, most people had corner as the most needed position, and then you waited until the round 3, and then for a lot of people got a guy too when there were still other corners on the board. So I think it's more so that maybe people wouldn't hate these picks if it wasn't made when it was over certain other players and things like that. And that's when it's just kind of when we talk about draft, like we're so invested into the draft nowadays with all the mock drafts that people can do and all the scouting reports we get and everything. So people do get so deeply into, okay, well, there's 5 other players that could have been selected at this point that would have been starters or could more likely be starters sooner. And so that's where the mindset of people, maybe if it was the next round, around 3 or 4, people would be like, okay, this is good. If they would have gotten one of those top corners in, the first 2 rounds, it probably would have been a different conversation.
And I go back to, for all of those people who did mock drafts, did you have Puka Nacua going as late as he did a season ago?
I mean, there's always
in the draft ago, right? Like
if Bucky was finding those hidden gems the last couple years, maybe it'd be different too, but he hasn't.
And right, everyone wants to hold Tank Bigsby, Britton Strange, and Tank Bigsby against Trent Baalke, and I can understand that pushback.
Yeah.
They did not have productive seasons, and that trajectory has to change in order for those picks to be worth what they are. But he also found Antonio Johnson, who might be an incredible starter on the football team. So that's where again, I'm always going to look at it optimistically because I want the team to succeed. Yeah. And it's way more fun to talk about wins. Yeah, As I always note, we started Helmets and Heels in August of 2014.
People just have to be realistic because, also we've been let down so much. I feel like they feel like in the city, and so many years and so many drafts afterwards, we're sitting there being like, heck yeah, that was awesome. We're winning 10 games this year, and then it didn't happen. So now I think people are a little more cautious about certain things, and so there's obviously the extreme on each side. There's the full-on homers that are like nothing they do can go wrong, and then there's the ones that are like everything Trent Baalke touches dies, and it's like there truly are these people, and there's somewhere in the middle that has been correct the last couple years, and somewhere in the middle of realistically which of these draft picks are going to work and which aren't.
Yeah, we've had 2 playoff seasons since 2014 when this show originally started. 2.
So there's a little
lot more times when we were talking about the 1st overall draft pick or the 7th overall draft pick, all that kind of